on both channels. And you can invite people. If you know somebody else who could benefit from saving or learning more about how they can get a benefit from property taxes, have them join. It couldn't hurt them.
That it can, and hopefully it will help them, as that is the goal of our flat tax workshop. So thank you, Trustee Winston. Thank you, Trustee Matson. Thank you to our guests who have joined us. We are delighted to have you, and we are going to dive right in because we have a ton of information. And it looks like we are being joined by numerous people. So as they come in, hello, greatest of evenings, and thank you to all. So my name is Mario Reed, and I am an attorney. My office is located in South Holland, Illinois. But before I was ever an attorney, I was a young child growing up in Park Forest, Illinois, and that's where I am from. So I am a South suburbanite through and through. And that's a big reason why we do these workshops, because Trustee Winston, as well as Trustee Matson and myself, we are dedicated and loyal to the South suburbs for a variety of reasons. And we all agree that the taxes in the South suburbs are just too high. And anyone who's on this call, I'm sure will probably agree with me that the property taxes in the South suburbs are simply too high.
They are.
There you go. Excellent. Well, thank you for confirming my suspicion. Now, what the problem is that while I was growing up, and I grew up in the 90s in Park Forest, graduated from Ritchie's High School, class of 99, what I would always hear about why the property taxes were so high was because we didn't have businesses. That was always the go-to. In Park Forest, we once upon a time had the center in downtown Park Forest, Montgomery Ward, Sears, all of the old throwbacks were there. But eventually they started closing up as Lincoln Mall moved in and the businesses kind of left. The car dealership that was on Lincoln Highway went away. So it was easy for me to think, well, they must be right. It must be because there aren't as many businesses here that our property taxes are so high. But then I went and I was an intern at the Metropolitan Planning Council. And this was in 2006 when I was back at Columbia College trying to earn my bachelor's degree. And while working for the Metropolitan Planning Council, I had the luxury of participating and being a part of an organization called A+ Illinois. And that organization was created to change the funding formula in the state of Illinois. Now, at the time, I was all of 24, 25. I didn't own a home, didn't have any children. So I didn't really have as much incentive to learn about public school education funding at that time. But because I was an intern, I wanted to learn everything. And what I found out was that the state of Illinois ranks 50th out of all 50 states in terms of the contribution for public school funding. So I'll repeat that. Out of all 50 of the United States of America, the state of Illinois contributes the smallest amount to the funding of public schools in the state of Illinois. Every other state contributes a larger percentage. There are states such as North Carolina and Michigan, which they contribute above 60% of the funding for their public schools. The state of Michigan, which is not too far from here, take you about an hour and a half if you get rolling and there are no police officers trying to stop you. That state contributes 69% to the funding of its public schools. 69%. The state of North Carolina contributes 64%. States like Idaho, Louisiana, North Carolina, they are contributing over 50% to the funding of their public schools. The national average is 47%. So what that means is that the state on average contributes about half. The federal government on average contributes between 7 and 9%. And then on average, local communities make up that difference, on average about 45%. So that's the average. However, the state of Illinois, which ranks last, on average contributes just 26%. 26% out of 100. So what that means is that if it costs $100 million to fund your public schools, the state of Illinois is only contributing $26 million. Well, if the state is only contributing 26%, who has to make up the difference? The answer is us. As local property owners, we have to make up the difference. And on average, local property taxpayers pay 66% to the funding of their public schools. And I want for everyone to see where I'm getting these numbers from. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is seeing is believing. And even though I'm not from Missouri, I do subscribe to the show me motto and mantra. So the state of Illinois publishes a state report card for every school throughout the state of Illinois. And you can find this on Google by simply typing in Illinois State Report Card. Once you do that, you can type in any school district, or you can just search by city. In this case, I always like to use my alma mater. So High School District 227, Rich Township. And the reason I like to use that is because it is the school district which has the communities that have the highest property taxes in the United States of America. So Park Forest has the highest average effective property tax rate in the United States of America, with an average effective tax rate of 37%. To put that into perspective, the city of Chicago's tax rate is just 6.7%. Park Forest, 37, Chicago, 6.7. That's the disparity that exists.
Wow.
Now, I'm sorry, does someone have a question? Okay, perfect. So when we go and look at this state report card for the school districts, it has what's called a snapshot. And as a part of the snapshot, it shows you some of what the state considers to be the key results or key contributions. So there's only one high school within Rich Township. It used to be 3. We had Rich East, which I graduated from, Rich South, which was in Richton Park, and Rich Central, which was in Olympia Fields. However, the school board made a decision to merge all 3 of the schools and essentially convert it into one high school. And that high school is now Rich Township High School, which still has 2 campuses, the Central Campus in Olympia Fields and the South Campus in Richton Park, but they are now one high school. Similar to what Bloom did a few years ago as well, when they went from Bloom Trail and Bloom to now just Bloom Township. Well, when we look at the data, Rich Township has an 83% graduation rate. Now, while that's not terrible, there are some high school districts around the state which are well below 75%, Rockford being one of them. 83% is not what ideally we're shooting for. The retention rate is 51%, and the chronic absenteeism is 66%. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's based on what's happening at home. And while I agree that some of it does have to do with what's at home, I strongly believe more of it has to do with the fact that when we look at the evidence-based funding, Rich Township has an adequacy target. And when we talk about that adequacy target, that's a number that the State Board of Education, they set that number. So the Illinois State Board of Education has said that for Rich Township's high school, they need $52 million to be adequate. That's not to be superior. That's not to blow away anybody's expectations. That's to simply be adequate, to turn the lights on, to pay the teachers, to make sure that you have enough funding for programs, sports programs, arts, the extracurriculars, all of those things that when we think about the high school experience, every single young person throughout the country should be entitled to have just an adequate education at a minimum. That's the baseline. However, even though Park Forest pays the highest property tax rate in the United States of America, its high school still only has funding at a rate of 78%. And that's only on a budget of $52 million. And I keep saying these words only because when we talk about what ultimately is important, nothing should be more important than the educational experience for our young people. So the state said Rich Township needs 52 million. The local taxpayers are paying the highest tax rates in the United States of America. And even while doing so, their high school is still 22% short of what it needs just to be adequate. And that is why the taxes in the southern suburbs of Chicago are so high. So I'm going to pause here because I've thrown a mouthful and I know a lot of people are digesting. Does anyone have any questions or want to make any comments or state anything about what we've discussed thus far?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Has it always been like this with the state of Illinois paying such a small percentage?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. So since 1970, which is when the state constitution was enacted in the state of Illinois, this funding formula has been in effect. Now, I don't know of what it was before 1970, so I guess I can't answer yes with certainty, but I can tell you since 1970, it's been in effect. And the reason why it's been in effect, and I'm going to show it to you because it is, it's something which is very easy to understand once you are shown it in this way. So if you had the opportunity to pay a low tax rate but have great schools, would you want that for your system?
Yes.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's a foregone conclusion. You don't even
Right.
have to think for a second about it. Well, that's what it is that happened. So when we look at the wealthy communities, we look at communities such as South Barrington. And I made this photo image because to me, it makes it as clear as possible. So South Barrington is a community that's here in Cook County. It is a community of 5,000 residents. Olympia Fields is a community here in Cook County. It's a community of 4,949 residents. So they're almost identical in size. And as far as I can tell, both of them kind of represent the elite wealthy, just on different levels. So the median household income in South Barrington is $138,000. So, and I'm going to pull up that slide so everyone can see. So according to the census that, I'm sorry, 183,000. South Barrington's median household income is $183,750. The median property value for South Barrington is $855,700, almost $1 million. So the median price of a home in South Barrington is $855,000. Now let's contrast that. Olympia Fields, which is the same number of residents. So we're talking about the same group of people. However, the median household income in Olympia Fields is $93,350. Now, growing up in Park Forest, if someone would have told me, hey, you can have a salary of $93,350, I would have said, sign me up and I am rich. But when you compare it to a community such as South Barrington, it shows that it's not the same amount of wealth. Well, now contrast that with the median property value. In Olympia Fields, the median property value is $227,500, just under $250,000, but 1/3 of the amount of the South Barrington median property value. So because of that, when we look at two homes that are equal or comparable, as the term would be in the industry. So when we look at two homes that are comparable, and I'm going to pull that slide back up. So we have these two homes. The home on the left was purchased in South Barrington, and it was purchased for $490,000. The home on the right was purchased in Olympia Fields, and it was purchased for $455,000. One is in Olympia Fields, one is in South Barrington. Well, when we look at the tax bills, the tax bill for the home on the left is $11,361.39. The tax bill for the one on the right in Olympia Fields is $21,819.90, more than $10,000 more. So the homes are very similar in terms of value. One person said, I want to give you $490,000 for this home. Another person said, I'll give you $450,000 for this home. They have the same square footage. Both of them are essentially 4,000 square feet. The difference is 8 square feet. However, because of the fact that Olympia Fields doesn't have the same amount of wealth as Barrington does, that's the reason why the property tax rate in Olympia Fields is twice as high as that in Barrington. The tax rate in Barrington is 8.9%. The tax rate in Olympia Fields is 18.76%. It is exclusively because there just isn't enough money in our communities. And that's the reason why our communities were never supposed to be paying for our public schools. The state of Illinois is supposed to pay the primary responsibility for our public schools. And a lot of people say, well, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that the state of Illinois has the primary responsibility to pay for our public schools? Well, that's a great question. And anytime that I have questions about what the state of Illinois is responsible for, I go to this beautiful document, which is known as the state constitution. And when I look at the state constitution, I then go to Article 10, which is education. And when we look at Article 10, which tells us what the state constitution has to say about education, Section 1, paragraph 3 states, the state has the primary responsibility for financing the system of public education. Remember, 1970 is the date that I gave, and that's because the Constitution for the state of Illinois was adopted at special election on December 15th of 1970. Article 10 said the state has the primary responsibility for financing the system of public education. I wasn't even born yet. I came on the scene 11 years later, 1981. But in 1970, the state legislature said the state has the primary responsibility for financing the system of public education. Well, if the state has the primary responsibility, let's take a look and see how much is the state contributing. Once again, all of this information is public. So when we go to the Illinois report card and look at the revenue percentages, it tells us how much the state is funding our public schools. For Rich Township High School District 227, the state contributed just 19.2%, which means that the local community has to make up the difference of 72.7. And there just isn't enough money in Olympia Fields, in Park Forest, in Matson, in Richton Park, in Country Club Hills, in Chicago Heights. There isn't enough money to pay for the $52 million that the high school needs because there are so many other school districts, grade school districts, pre-K, elementary. So because there isn't enough money in our communities, in order to even come close to paying for our schools, the state or our schools require a big chunk of our property tax values. And then even after taking a big chunk, we still aren't funding our schools at 100%. Now, what about that school district that South Barrington sends their kids to? How much are they receiving? Because remember, their taxes were low. So their school district is, I think, 211. So let's take a look. So we're going to go back to the state report card and type in high school district 211, township high school. Yep, there we go. So surprise, surprise. Even though Barrington has one of the lowest property tax rates in Cook County at just 8%, which is less than half of what Olympia Fields is paying, somehow, some way, their school district, which has a budget of 170 million, is 100% to budget. Their graduation rate is 93%, 10% points better than Rich Township. Their retention rate is 96%. Their chronic absenteeism is 18%. Remember, Rich Township was 66%. Their student mobility is just 6%. And it once again goes to show that by meeting that adequacy target, the results typically will follow. If you give schools the money they need, the results will be there. Someone has a question.
Yes. So what percentage is the state giving them?
Great question. So, and I'll pose this to you before we look it up. What percentage do you think the state is giving to them?
It's a higher percent. It should be equal, but I'm sure it's not equal.
Right. But, and that's, again, all of this is kind of the fascinating part of this, because we think, well, the state must be giving them more, but no, it's the opposite. The state, the state is giving them less. And think about it.
Okay.
If there's more money in Barrington and their property values are higher, the state doesn't need to give them money because their local communities are giving them so much. So they don't have to get money from the state. So when we look at the funding percentage, 89.3% is coming from the local community, while just 6.8% is coming from the state. But it's because Barrington has a median property value of $855,000. So what's 5% of $855,000?
So you drop off. All right.
I'm sorry, does someone have a question? Okay, all right, I'm gonna mute a few. So because of the fact that Barrington has so much money, that's the reason why the state doesn't need to give them money. So under our current funding formula, local communities are allowed to keep their wealth local. So if you're a wealthy community and you keep your wealth local, your schools are going to be fully funded. But if you're not as wealthy of a community, such as Chicago Heights, such as Park Forest, such as Ford Heights, such as Riverdale, such as Phoenix, such as Calumet City, Dalton, all of these communities which are conveniently and inconveniently for us located in the south suburbs, your taxes are going to be higher and your schools are still going to be funded at less than 100%. And that's because the state is not contributing its fair share. At a minimum, the state should be contributing 50.0001%. The state constitution supports that in conjunction with what the law says a primary responsibility is. If something is a primary job duty, you are supposed to perform it at least 50% plus one of the time on your job. However, right now, the state isn't even coming close to that 50% number. So a lot of people then ask, well, what about the lottery money? Wasn't it supposed to fund our schools? Well, the answer is yes, the lottery money. And that question comes up because back in the 90s, there was a push, or it was the early 2000s, I'm sorry, when Governor Blagojevich was in office, to privatize the lottery. And we were sold that as an option because by privatizing the lottery, that money was supposed to go to schools and that was going to balance our school budgets. Well, the answer is that was a lie. And it's because there isn't enough gambling taking place in the state to generate enough revenue to balance our school budgets. More than 60% of all schools throughout the state of Illinois are underfunded. On average, that underfunding is more than 20%. So there is no school in the southern suburbs of Chicago which is currently funded at 100%. Not HF, no public school. So private schools, Marion, Calvary, they are, because of course they're getting the money directly from the attendees. But there's no public school in the southern suburbs which is funded at 100%. And that's simply because we do not have enough money in our communities to fund all of our public schools. And that's the reason why we shouldn't be funding public schools at a local level. For the majority of the funding, we should be funding our public schools at the state level. And if we transition to that, like Michigan, like North Carolina, like Idaho, like Louisiana, we will be able to then see property tax relief in communities that don't have enough money, and we will see 100% funding of all schools throughout the state.
Well, if it's in the Constitution, why isn't anyone holding the state accountable?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that question. Because before tonight, did you know that it was in the Constitution?
Well,
No.
I've been to your session before, so I knew it from you.
There you go. So it's a case where there are so many things that happen within our government, within our system, and until enough people get upset about it, that's when it is that we see a change. And that's what these workshops are about. It is to help people know, hey, our current system isn't even complying with the state constitution. So we need to bring about a change. But how we do that is that we need for enough people to be educated about what the current system is, what an alternative is, and then we have to hold our state senators and our state representatives accountable. That's what we're working towards. And I cannot say thank you enough, because we've been doing these every first and third Wednesday for the last 2.5 years. And tonight we are seeing one of the best turnouts that we've seen in months. So thank you to each and every one of you who has attended. Whatever it is that brought you here, I'm grateful, but we need more. We need for each of you to invite a friend, and that friend to invite a friend, because once people understand it, they agree we need to change. But before tonight, a lot of people who are attending probably thought the reason their taxes were so high was because the mayor isn't doing a good job, or the trustees are just making bad decisions with their budget, or that Cook County is Crook County and just spending all of their money. When in reality, it's the fact that the state of Illinois is not contributing its fair share, and we can change from that. All we have to do is go to a 10% flat property tax rate. If we go to a 10% flat property tax rate for every community in the state of Illinois, Barrington, Hinsdale, Burr Ridge, Winnetka, New Trier, Rockford, Springfield, Park Forest, Olympia Fields, if every single community pays 10% as a flat property tax, and then we take that money and send it down to Springfield and have Springfield send the money to every school district based on how many students they have, that will then ensure that every single school district in the state of Illinois will have 100% funding, and communities in the suburbs will have tax relief, sometimes as much as 66%. So there's a question that's in the chat that says, what about the explanation that whatever money the board gets from the lottery, they take a similar amount out of the CPS budget, so it's a wash? So there's not 100% truth to that. So the money that comes from the lottery goes to the State Board of Education, and then the State Board of Education uses a lot of that money to make up the differences between schools that aren't funded at 100%. That's what's called the evidence-based funding. So a few years ago, Senator Meeks, at the time he was in the state Senate, he was responsible in large part for bringing about evidence-based funding. And it says school districts that are less than 80%, 70%, we're going to give them extra money to get them to at least 70%. Well, CPS in many school districts is a lot closer to 100%. So the money that they're taking out of the budget isn't a wash. It's just a case where they're not giving them more than what they normally would if that state money from the lottery was there. So it's not a wash. It's just coming from a different source. So now I'm going to pause here because, again, we've covered a lot. Are there any other questions? Is everyone understanding why the taxes are so high?
It's beginning to come clearer to me.
Excellent. Do you have?
Okay, with the Constitution.
Yes.
So, in order for us to get something moving, do the state senators, do they have to vote on this? Or they just have to push for this to be done?
Great question. So in order for us to see the kind of change that we need for one state senator and one state representative to introduce legislation to change the public school funding formula. That's what we're working towards. However, Trustee Matz, Trustee Winston, and myself, we've met with numerous state senators. We've met with numerous state representatives. Trustee Matz has done a phenomenal job of really working her resources in the state capitol and has set up half a dozen meetings. However, when we meet with these state senators and state representatives, they always say that right now, it's simply too risky for their political careers. And the reason why is because if you live in the southern suburbs, you're going to be all for going to a flat tax of 10%,
Right.
because it's beneficial. But if you live in Barrington and somebody says, we're going to increase your taxes and we're going to take that money and send it to schools in Harvey, are you going to be in favor of that?
No.
Exactly. And that's the reason why a lot of state senators and a lot of state representatives aren't willing to support that, because they're worried about what their colleagues are going to think.
Right.
But they don't work for their colleagues. They work
Exactly.
for us.
Yeah,
But
we need to start making these people accountable and working for us.
Exactly. But we have to be educated about it
Right.
first. And that's
Exactly.
what these workshops are about.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
Valoria Robinson, you have your hand up.
I do, yes. I'm wondering that you gave an example, comparison of the two communities. What would that look like in the scenario of the 10% flat tax? Do you have that example?
Yes. Well, so I don't have it illustrated, but we can do that example. So when we look at the example, and for those of you who have joined a little bit later, earlier, I shared an example that recently has been making its rounds on Facebook. And I'm so grateful and thankful to everyone who shared it, because it's helping getting traction around this topic. But I'm going to put it back up. And so that everyone is aware, I created this example. I don't have much of a life, so that's what I do in my free time, is I create these examples because I want for everyone to see it as easy of an illustration as possible. So we have two homes that are the same size that were sold for about the same amount. The one on the left was sold 2 years ago. It was purchased for $490,000. The one on the right was purchased last year for $455,000. The one on the left is 3,959 square feet. The one on the right is 3,964 square feet. Both communities are 5,000 residents. So everything is equal. However, the tax bill for the one on the left is $11,361.39. The tax bill on the one for the right is $21,819.90. Now, in going to the illustration, if we go to a 10% flat tax, the tax bill on the left is going to increase to approximately $12,500. Because remember, the tax rate is 8.3%. So we're just adding 1.7%. So doing just rough math, we're going to add on about another $1,200. So 10% would be $11,360. So that's what that math looks like. For the tax bill for the Olympia Fields property, we're going to cut that tax bill in almost half because its tax bill is 18.7. So by going to 10%, it's now going to see a reduction down to roughly about the same amount, $12,500. So these two houses, which are equally assessed and equally sized, are going to pay the same tax bill. But the reason why this is going to be so effective is because if the median property value of a home in South Barrington is $855,700, if we increase the tax rate for South Barrington to 10%, it's going to generate a new $200 to $300 million in revenue. And now, instead of that revenue staying in the South Barrington area, it's going to go down to Springfield and it's going to be allocated all over the state. And if we generate a new $200 million in just South Barrington, imagine what's going to happen in communities like Hinsdale, Burr Ridge, Winnetka, New Trier, these communities, Naperville, these communities that have median property values of $1 million plus. Now, a lot of people will say, but yeah, we're going to lose money from Olympia Fields. Absolutely, we will. But because it's such a small pie, even when we lose that money, it's not going to have the same impact as the money we're going to gain in wealthy communities. So that's the illustration to show what the tax bill will look like if we go to 10%. South Barrington's is going to go up by 1.7 percentage points. However, Olympia Fields is going to go down by 8.7 percentage points. So the tax bill is going to almost be cut in half in Olympia Fields. The tax bill is going to go up a little bit in Barrington, but the cumulative gain is going to be so drastic that we'll be able to fund our schools and everybody will be on equal footing. Every single property owner will pay the same percentage, which will be the same proportion throughout the state. So does that answer the question, Ms. Robinson?
And I think I think the reason I was mentioning that is because it seems like it's a paltry, 1.7% that there, or whatever the percentage was that you said, that I can't understand, why there's so much.
Yes, and one of the things that I love to stress and that I appreciate about Trustee Matz, Trustee Winston, myself, is that we aren't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. We want to be perfectly clear and transparent with everyone. So the reason why this is such a hot button, or why it will be resisted, is because not only are we talking about raising property taxes in South Barrington, but we're talking about changing where that money goes. Currently, Barrington is perfectly okay paying 8.3% because their schools have $270 million. So if I lived in Barrington, even though I might not like my property tax bill, I'll say, well, I have the best schools in the state. Barrington High School District 211 is ranked 10th in the state of Illinois. They have the 10th best high school and their tax rate is just 8.3. Well, in the converse, Olympia Fields has a tax rate of 18.7 and their high school isn't even ranked in the top 200 in the state of Illinois. So what we're talking about is, yes, we're only talking about a paltry percentage that Barrington is going to increase to, but we're also talking about the fact that now the money that used to stay local at a rate of 90% is all going down to Springfield, and it's going to start funding schools in Harvey, in Phoenix, in Fort Heights, Park Forest, Olympia Fields. And that's a problem for a lot of people. And I understand it. I send my daughter to private school because I want her to have the best education, but I still have to pay property taxes in Lansing in the amount of $12,000. So I pay
Exactly.
$7,000 to Calvary, and then I turn around and pay $12,000 for the schools because the schools are no good. So it's a very big change, but more than 66% of property owners in the state are going to see a reduction to their tax bill, and their schools are going to receive an increase in funding. We just need those 66% of the state to know this is what's going to happen and why they should be in favor of it. And that's why we need as many people as possible tuning in every first and third Wednesday, because the more people who hear about it and understand it, when we do go back to the state senators and the state reps and say, if you don't support this, we're going to find somebody who does and vote that person in instead of you, who will actually have the votes and the support to make it mean something. And that's what we're working towards. So thank you for that question and that insight.
So in your scenario, are you saying that Barrington would get less money from the state? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying Barrington's going to get the same percentage of money from the state as Olympia Fields. But
Okay.
the money that right now is going to Barrington schools isn't going to go to Barrington schools necessarily. It's first going to go to the state, and then the state's going to send it wherever the money is needed. So under our current setup, when we pay our property taxes, we pay our property taxes to the county treasurer. The county treasurer then sends that money to the school districts based on what their levy is. In districts such as 227, they're going to send all the money that came in, but there just isn't enough money. And that's what results in District 227 being 78% to adequacy. Whereas all of the money for South Barrington, they pay it to the Cook County treasurer, and then the Cook County treasurer sends all of that money back to High School District 211. Well, there's more than enough money there, and that's why their high school is running at 100%. So the money comes in, goes to the treasurer, and then goes right back to the school districts. What will happen is the money will go to the treasurer and then go to the state. And then the State Board of Education will be responsible for sending the money to every school district. So District 227 will get 100% of their funding adequacy budget. Barrington will get 100% of their adequacy funding budget. The only thing is that right now there are a lot of school districts that they have a surplus. So High School District, I believe it's 85. So Hinsdale has the lowest tax rate in Cook County. And I believe they're either High School District 85, must be 86. There we go, Hinsdale. So Hinsdale School District has a surplus. They have 144% to their adequacy budget. So not only are they meeting their adequacy target, but they have an extra 44%. Their target is 56 million. They received $81 million. Well, under our scenario of a 10% flat tax, Hinsdale is no longer going to run at a surplus. They're going to be at 100%. And that extra, what's that, $25 million? That extra $25 million is going to be reallocated to school districts that aren't at 100%. And what's going to end up happening is not only is it going to be an extra 25 million, it's going to end up being an extra 60 million, because right now Hinsdale's tax rate is just 6%. If we increase them to 10%, that's going to generate another 500 million to $1 billion in revenue. So now that money comes in, goes to the treasurer sends that money down to Springfield to the State Board of Education, and every school throughout the state, Rockford, Springfield, Carbondale, Lancaster, all of these communities that have schools, they're going to get that revenue to be able to fund their schools at 100%. But if you live in Hinsdale, your tax bill has almost doubled and your schools are receiving less, because right now they're at 144. They're going to go down to 100 and be taxed more. So if you live in Hinsdale, this scenario is terrible, but it's the same scenario that all of us in the southern suburbs have been living with, and our schools are under 100%. So we are just leveling the playing field. But if you live in Hinsdale, it's going to hurt a lot, because you're saying to yourself, why should I pay more and get less? But it's because all the rest of us have been paying more and getting less. We're making it equal for everyone.
Okay, so which communities, is Hinsdale one of the communities that will be hit the hardest? Which communities will be
Yes.
hit the hardest?
Hinsdale is the community that's going to be hit the hardest, and that's because they have the lowest property tax rate in Cook County. So one of the things that I usually share, and I'm glad that you asked that question because it reminds me. So I want to stress again, all this information is public. None of this information is information that I came up with or that I'm the creator of. All this information is available for anyone. There is a tax rate report that comes out every single year that the Cook County Clerk's Office publishes. I used to work for the Cook County Clerk's Office, which is how I know about the report. And in this report, it gives every single tax rate throughout Cook County, down to the 100th place percentage point. They also organize it so you can quickly see some of the highlights, or in my opinion, the lowlights. So the highest average tax rates, Park Forest, Phoenix, and Fort Heights. 35.46% for Park Forest, 28.159% for Phoenix, 27.94% for Fort Heights. Those are the communities that are going to win the most, because a rate of 35% is going to come down to 10%. So that's a 66% savings. If you pay 10 grand in property taxes in Park Forest, your bill is now going to be 3,300 and your schools are going to be funded at 100%. You are the big winner. Well, Burr Ridge, and I apologize, I said Hinsdale, but as it turns out, Hinsdale's now 2. Last year they were 1, but they keep flip-flopping. Burr Ridge now is going to be the biggest loser. They're going to go from 6.545% up to 10%, which is still not ridiculous. Because look, Park Forest is at 3.5 times that 10%. But they're going to see essentially a 33% increase to their tax bill. And then the money is now going to leave their community and go to Park Forest, go to Phoenix, go to Fort Heights, go to Mattston, Olympia Fields, Cal City, every other community that needs that money. So these 3 communities, amongst others, are going to see they're going to hurt the most, but they're going to hurt the same as all the rest of us, because now we're all paying the same flat tax rate of 10%.
So how are the surrounding counties approaching this? Do they have flat taxes, or is their
No, because
education
remember,
system working a little better?
the funding formula is for the state. So every single county has the same funding formula from the state, and the state on average is contributing just 26% to every school throughout the state of Illinois. We're all in this predicament together. And that's part of the reason why Trustee Matz and Trustee Winston and myself, we made the trip up to Rockford. So Rockford has a 13.9% tax, and their schools are terrible. They are funded at a rate of like 64%. Their graduation rate is like 70%. They are just bad. So a community like Rockford is going to benefit, much like East St. Louis, another community, which is just terrible. So every single county in the state of Illinois is going through this same problem, because it's the state of Illinois funding formula. And that's why we need our state senators and our state reps to bring about this change. But we need enough people to be knowledgeable about it that we can force the hand of those elected officials.
Okay, that's why what you just said is what I thought. So the example that you gave, was there a community like I can't remember the community that you said.
Rockford and East
Rockford.
St. Louis.
One of the ones that would get the hardest, hit the hardest. So you only cover Cook County in that assessment, but you'd have to do it statewide to take a look and see which communities would get hit the hardest on that.
Well, so yes, but it's going to work out the same way. So I can tell you without.
No, I know that, but I'm saying if you can get those communities that would get hit the hardest to come on board with you, that was my line of thinking. That's why I said that.
And the beautiful part is, so I agree with you. If I could go to Hinsdale and Burr Ridge and Glenview and get them to support this, then it would be a no-brainer. But we're adults, and we all understand the likelihood of that is slim. But the beauty is I don't have to get them on board, because there are 67% of communities in Cook County and the whole state which are going to benefit from this. So as long as I can get all 67% of the ones who are going to benefit, we would have more support than just the 33% that are going to feel the pain. So it would make very little sense for me to go to the ones who are going to feel the most pain and try and convince them, when there's a much better audience of people who are going to benefit and say, hey, will you support this? The answer is yes. We just need more people. So Nikita M., you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mario. I definitely understand what you are attempting to do. And are you going to give us some direction on how to get other people involved? Or what
Yes.
is end goal, just besides just, coming onto your Zooms, what do you need us to do to get the word out? Because that's
So-
really what I'm here for, because I'm work and I'm in a nonprofit affordable housing, so I know
Mhm.
exactly what you're talking about.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. So unfortunately, we don't have a magic bullet. We don't have a kind of microwave version of this. And the reason why is because we saw what happened when the governor introduced the fair tax for the income tax. Back in 2019, Governor Pritzker introduced the fair income tax and said, instead of us being at a flat income tax of 4.95%, we want to go to a graduated income tax, which is what we have at the federal level and what almost every other state has. When the governor did that, he forced it through and put it as a constitutional ballot question. It was on the ballot as a referendum for every Illinoisan to vote for. Once that question got onto the ballot, the wealthiest individuals in the state said, this is going to be terrible for us because we're going to pay more in income taxes, and we don't want to do that. So they went out and they spent millions of dollars in a smear campaign where they alleged that this is going to be bad for small business owners. And they were playing fast and loose with the facts. As a small business owner, sure, I make over the $250,000 threshold that was going to be applicable. But the majority of Illinoisans were not going to be impacted. Instead, they were going to be helped. But because the majority of Illinoisans were uneducated about it, when those commercials came on right before the elections, the overwhelming majority of Illinoisans voted against that fair tax, even though it was in their best interest. So what that taught us is no matter how great of something is, if the people who are eventually going to be asked to vote for it are uneducated about it, it's very easy for people who are going to lose to come in and spin it in such a way that now people are going to vote against it. So we need people to continue to show up. And trust me, I've been working on this since I was at A+ Illinois in 2006. So I know of how frustrating it is for the arduous, slow moving. But the thing is that the only way this is going to work is enough people have to understand the problem, and they have to be willing to support it once they understand the prospective solution. The majority of people, so, and Trustee Winston can speak to this because he had our flyers and our literature, and he went out to festivals last summer and people were literally walking past calling him negative names and derogatory terms because he was advocating for a flat tax. And that's because most people don't know what it is. So if they just see flat tax, they're going to presume, oh, it's something which is adverse to poor people, when in fact it's the opposite. But until you actually hear it, see the information and understand it, most people don't automatically know what it is. And we have to get enough people. Give us an hour to an hour and a half. Typically within an hour to an hour and a half, most people get it 100%. But we need for people to first get it, because that way, when it comes time for Hinsdale and Burr Ridge and Glenview to start their smear campaigns against it, enough people will say, nope, I'm not falling for the okie doke. I know how good this is going to be for our communities, and I'm still going to support it, and then it will pass.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. So there's a question. What is your response to the argument that there is no guarantee that more money equals better performance? So my argument is that let's try it. So we've seen that Hinsdale, Burr Ridge, and Glenview and Barrington, they have 100% of their adequacy budget and the results are there. So if we don't know with certainty that it's because of the money, then there should be no problem with us trying it. And then we can always come back 10 years later and we can revisit it. I don't know if anyone's familiar with what are called sunset provisions of legislation, but there are provisions which are called sunset provisions. And what it is, it was created in the late 90s. And it says, we're not sure if this law is a good law. So instead of making it so where somebody has to come back and overturn that law, we're just going to automatically have a sunset date where if we don't go back in and say we want to keep this law, it automatically goes away. So we can build in sunset provisions into the legislation. So if we want to test to see that more money equals better performance, let's do it for 5 years. Let's do it for a decade. And then we can study it at the end of that 5-year or 10-year period. And if it didn't yield better performance, let's sunset it and we'll go back to what we already have. But if it does, then we'll stick with it. So the next question is Chicago Teachers Union behind this? The answer is we have not had the opportunity to pitch it to them. But remember, Chicago is going to be one of those communities that is going to see an increase. Because if you look here, the city of Chicago's tax rate is just 6.91%. So Chicago is in the boat of Burr Ridge, Hinsdale, and Glenview, where they're going to see their property taxes increase, and the money is going to leave Chicago public school systems and go all over the state. The next question is, who is sponsoring the legislation? The answer is we don't have anyone yet, because we've yet to find a state senator and a state representative who is willing to work for their constituents instead of for their political standing within the Illinois legislature. We've actually heard from state reps who called me personally and said, stop talking about this. Stop telling people that we're 50th out of 50. It doesn't make us look good. So currently we haven't found anyone. And it's because whenever we do meet with state senators and state reps, oftentimes they say, well, my constituents don't even know this is a problem. So because of that, I can continue to do nothing and nothing bad will happen to me. And they're right, because most of the state reps and state senators in the southern suburbs, in Rockford, in Proviso Township, and other communities that are suffering with this have had the same state reps and the same state senators for the last 20 years. And they just keep getting voted in over and over again because people don't know this is a problem and what there is as a potential solution. Any other questions? Anything that anybody is unsure of that they want to get shored up? Anybody want to see what your local tax rate is while I'm here, so you can see just how big of an impact it would have on you? All right, so one of the things, and a lot of people, and going back to Nikita, thank you again for that comment of saying kind of what can you all do to help with the initiative. We like to liken our initiative to MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So in the 90s, when I was a teenager in Park Forest, we used to get the Star newspaper every Thursday and every Sunday. And I would read the police blotter, and I would see 5 and 6 and 8 different entries about DUIs. So I grew up thinking that DUIs are just a regular part of life. Well, in the early 2000s, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving Special Interest Group was formed and created. And that organization completely changed the laws, not only in the state of Illinois, but in the entire United States by organizing and then marching on Springfield and marching on Capitol Hill and saying, if you don't support tougher DUI laws, we're going to vote you out. We're going to run candidates against you who support this tougher legislation because we're tired of our sons and our daughters dying because of drunk drivers. Well, that whole process took about a decade to 15 years. And I'm going to be honest, that's about the time that we believe it's going to take to be able to get enough traction, education, and information. But how it works is we need as many people as possible to continue to tell a friend. It was very easy for Mothers Against Drunk Driving to get people on board because you simply go in the room and say, do you want your daughter to be killed by a drunk driver? Answer is no. Okay, support stronger legislation. It was very easy to get that messaging across. And then wealthy people didn't have an incentive to not support it because it's not as if though drunk driving only affected poor people or wealthy people. So it was a little bit different of an issue. This is really about class. If you're wealthy, you're probably not going to be a fan of money leaving your community to educate other poor communities. But what we're talking about is equality. We want everyone to pay the same percentage, and in turn, our children and our schools get the same percentage to educate. It's not that progressive or radical of a concept. It's just one that most people don't know is the problem, and that's what we're working towards changing. So just like MAD went in and said, we are going to lobby and then march on Springfield and Washington, eventually that's what we're hoping to grow to. But we need for enough people to understand it and support it. And then the next time that we meet with one of the state senators or state reps, we can say, hey, look, last flat tax meeting, we had 4,000 attendees, and they're all in favor of this. And if you don't support it, these 4,000 individuals are going to vote for somebody who will. That's the kind of growth that we have to get to. And that's what we're hoping you all can help us with. If you were able to find an hour and 5 minutes to come on tonight, please ask a friend, a neighbor, an enemy, a coworker, join you for the first Wednesday of next month, and then it'll grow. Thankfully, today has shown that it can happen. We are at, I think, 14, which is the most we've been at for a while. There have been months where Trustee Matt, Trustee Winston, and myself, we just talk to one another, and we're just hoping somebody's coming on. So it's working. Thankfully, you all are showing that it can work. We just need the momentum.
Excuse me, do you have a way of capturing email addresses to send people the information beyond? Because I got it off of your page.
Yes, so that's something that, you know what, Trustee Matts and Trustee Winston will talk about. I think we can set up like a constant contact, and then we can start to use that. So that's a great point. Thank you. What we'll start doing is anyone who's comfortable being a part of our distribution list, if you'll go ahead and type that information in the chat group, I'll personally take it down and we'll start working towards that. That's a great recommendation and something that I think is very reasonable.
So what do you want, our email?
Yes, if you'll be
Okay.
so kind as to provide us with your email, and then we're going to create a listserv so that way we can get it sent out. So we need a catchy acronym like MAD. You're right, we do need a catchy acronym like MAD, although the flat tax really achieves what it is that we're kind of hoping people. As I mentioned, it's problematic when people aren't willing to at least listen, but for anybody who is, it summarizes exactly what it is that we're proposing, and it helps them to get to kind of that informational, but it's something that we'll think about. So that's a great recommendation as well. Never hurts to have a catchy acronym. All right. Any other questions, any other comments? And again, I cannot say thank you enough. On behalf of Trustee Matts and Trustee Winston and myself, this is something that makes me smile a lot because we have been toiling away at this for years. And to see this many people show up and be engaged gives me a newfound resurgence of hope that we're going to get there. Any other questions, any other comments, anything that anybody wants to know about pertaining to tax? You know what? Let me talk about this. So a lot of people ask, well, can I just appeal my property taxes? And won't that be a solution? So our firm, we prepare professional tax appeals. I appeal my personal property taxes each and every year. When I appeal my property taxes, I'm not actually appealing the taxes, I'm challenging my assessed value. If I'm successful, then my tax liability is reduced. But that doesn't change the fact that my school districts and my community still need the same amount of money. So what ends up happening is that the school districts and the villages, they have to increase their levies the following year because they didn't get that money from me. And then everybody now sees an increase to their property taxes. So when you appeal your property taxes, even if you're successful, all you're doing is spreading around the liability for that taxes. And that's why our property taxes typically increase, because once there's less money coming in from what each of those taxing bodies expected, it causes for them to now have to ask for more the next year. So that's the story behind appealing your property taxes. It's a case where, yes, it gives me immediate relief, but all it does is create more liability that has to be spread amongst everybody. So that's the dynamic that happens with appealing your property taxes. Now, do not take that for a second of me suggesting that you not appeal, because until we get this ultimate relief, you still deserve individual relief. But just know that that individual relief is not helping everybody. It's helping you, but not everybody. Any other questions?
Do you have a list that breaks down the change for each community? I think that would be helpful.
And when you say a list that breaks it down, what do you mean by a list?
A list of all the different communities and what the change would be, before and after this 10%. I think that would be helpful.
In terms of like how much the tax bill would be?
Right. With, like you were saying, how Barrington would go from 6 something to 10, or this community would go from 8 something to 10. That would give you, or maybe you've done that already. Maybe you've crunched the numbers and which communities would fare better than others.
I haven't done it. The Cook County Clerk's Office has done it. So this tax report that I'm referring to that right now is on the screen, this report is what the clerk's office publishes every year, and it's called the tax rate report. And in it, it shows every single municipality in Cook County and what their tax rate is. So for the village of Alsip, it was 11.89%.
Right, but you'd have to go statewide, right? You'd have to look at it statewide, or you're just looking at Cook County because the population is larger?
So I'm looking at Cook County because the information is readily available. In the smaller counties, they don't publish these reports. So what would eventually have to happen is that we would have to go into each one of the counties and do that. But the reason why I'm doing it for Cook County is because, again, how the state of Illinois works, and you hear this often, as Cook County goes, so does the state. So if we get the 66% of municipalities in Cook County to support this legislation, that alone would ensure it could pass, even if no other municipality throughout or no other district, because it's based on the state senator's district and the state representative's district. That's how populous Cook County is. If enough state senators and state representatives, the ones who are going to benefit, support this, it passes just off of their votes alone. Now, we've went to Rockford, we've went to East St. Louis, and we know it's going to benefit them. So their state senators and their state reps should, in theory, be on board with this as well. But even if they weren't, the population and the respective percentage of representatives and senators in just Cook County alone could carry this legislation so as to pass it.
Well, thank you for indulging me. I'm just trying to kind of wrap my mind. This is my first time hearing this information, so I'm just trying to wrap my mind around it all.
That's okay. And thank you for playing kind of the devil's advocacy. Usually that's Trustee Winston's role, but he's been especially silent. So I thank you for stepping up to the plate and filling it. And it's good to get this dialogue, because I don't want for everyone to think that like this is just a foolproof plan that's not going to have any pushback. We've traveled all over the state. We went down to Bloomington, we went to Peoria. So we've heard from a lot of different voices, and the more different voices we can hear from, the better prepared we can be so as to give the information to other people. Because if you have these questions, somebody else has them as well. If you're thinking about the resistance, somebody else is as well. So it's best that we get it from people who kind of are hopefully in favor of it, as opposed to the ones who are vehemently against it.
And just to add to what you're saying, Attorney Reed, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. It's 8:14 right now. If we walk this slowly so that we can break it down so that everybody can get the understanding of it, then they can go to their legislators and say, listen, we understand that this is constitutionally written that you're supposed to be responsible for 50.001% of our students' education, and it's not happening. And so you can put the pressure on them and let them know that you're getting educated. And that's what we have to do. And we have to do it slow. And we understand that this is not going to happen overnight. It might not happen for years, but we are dedicated and committed, because right now here in Olympia Fields, it's heavy on our backs because we are looked at as a senior community. The median age here is 55. So a lot of people don't have their kids in school, but we're still paying for kids that are in school. So we need everybody's help. Like he said, tell somebody, send it out, email it to everybody you know so that they can come on board, because this is not just for the South suburbs or the city of Chicago, it's for the entire state of Illinois. Everybody's going to benefit from it. Everybody, even the ones who have to pay a little bit more, they can afford to pay a little bit more, because right now their high schools and grammar schools are looking like college institutions. And ours are abysmal. So we thank you guys for being on here tonight. We thank you for asking the tough questions. And if we don't know the answer, we're going to get back to you. But so far, we know the answer. So thank you guys for coming out tonight. If hearing no more questions, once again, just thank you for being a part of this movement, and we need you.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. This is about my second time attending, and I would like to say that me attending this time, I'm beginning to get a better understanding. So I think the more you attend, the better you understand. Because it's a lot to take on at one time, but then you go back and then we come back again, you're a little more ready, to understand it. So that's what I would like to say.
You're
Like a
absolutely
master
right,
class.
Beverly. I mean, it took us a few times as well. I know I'm a slow learner, Attorney Reed, and it took me a little bit of time, but now I got it, right? This is something that the way Attorney Reed explains it, it really is, listen, he did a good job. And I just think that it couldn't be much more simpler than this. And I think that we can get more people involved, long as we stay involved and get that message out there. Attorney Reed, thank you very much. Trustee Matz, thank you very much. Happy MLK Day to everyone and Happy New Year's. Anything else, Attorney Reed?
Yes, so I just want to say this for all of the people who are on. One of the other ways that you can also help us is to go and talk to your local elected officials, talk to your trustees, talk to your village mayors, and ask them to set up town halls in your communities. We went out to Country Club Hills, we're going out to Park Forest. If your local elected officials reach out and say, hey, there's this thing that we want to present to you and talk about, and then they can help us get more people into a single space, it allows for everybody to win. The local elected officials love to get as many people in the room as possible to tell them about the great things they're doing. And then we can actually tell them about a great thing that they can participate in. So one way that you can definitely help is go to your local elected officials and say, hey, I know that you normally have a town hall on this day or at this time. Will you please invite the flat tax initiative so that they can come out and explain that to our residents and your constituents, and we will show up. We'll show up, we'll bring free food, we'll bring raffle prizes, we'll bring everything that people will hopefully want to learn about how to improve their situation. So that's all I have. Thank you,
Flat tax
everyone.
session every first and third Wednesday at 7 p.m. The link doesn't change, guys. So if you got the link today or you copied the invite, you could copy the invite, send it to yourself as or what have you, but it doesn't change. You can just use the same one. And we're here every first and third Wednesday of the month. So every first and third Wednesday of the month, right here on Zoom, you can catch Attorney Reed, myself, and Trustee Matz. So until next time,
We'll keep the light on.
we'll keep the
All
light
right.
on.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Have a great one,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I have all
Mario.
the email
Thanks,
addresses.
everybody.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night. Thank you.
And then I'm going to copy down the invitation so that I can have it.